Let's talk Ciryl Gane. Guys, the timeline of Ciryl Gane is very interesting to me. Like, here, let me just throw a stat at you. Did you know Ciryl Gane had only had 3 fights before he fought in the UFC? He was 3-0. He was undefeated, but it was still only 3 fights. Now, there are meaningful fighters who could match that or who could even beat that stat, but they come from yesteryear, right? I mean, Brock Lesnar had no fights. Let's just say, for example, he's in the UFC. I think he was 2-1 at the time that he was the champion of the world. BJ Penn came in very quickly. Cain Velasquez, be another great example. Cain had about 7 fights, but it'd be another great example. 3 fights coming out of Paris. I would just wonder what Ciryl's tie-in was. Like, who his contact was. Somebody knew somebody. Somebody did a great job, got him over. Not to mention, it looks like it was the right guy to sign. So I'm just trying to give you a time frame of Ciryl Gane. It gets revealed to us somewhere along the way that he was training partners with Francis Ngannou. And that something happened within the gym. And they've parted ways, but it was Ciryl, the younger Ciryl, who stayed with the coach. Like, that's a really interesting story. One of the first times that I personally saw Ciryl, and it's the first time that I remember seeing him, he fought Junior Dos Santos. Now, Junior Dos Santos, I believe to be the best boxer in the heavyweight division. And I don't think there's very many examples that you could give me where I was wrong, where somebody who stood and traded with Junior and it went their way. They exist. You could argue the Cain fights, but you'll also see why those were such beloved fights, right? And those were rocky moments for both guys. Ciryl was able to put Junior away relatively fast and while on their feet. Big elbow, boom, hit him with it. Junior argued that that elbow landed behind the head in an illegal spot. And he was very sincere with his argument. He made the argument right in the cage, in fact. He told the announcers. So then he comes over and they watch it on the big screen. And I'm talking about Junior with Ciryl. Turn to the big screen where they replay it. And guess what Ciryl says? He said, yeah, maybe. To it being illegal. Yeah, maybe. And I've always appreciated him from that moment. Because what an illegal strike is actually a very confusing rule. It should have been allowable strike, but I know what Junior saw and I know how the tape looked, and I'm just sharing with you for Ciryl to not argue with the world champion, who was his elder, for him to show respect to his opponent, allow him to air his grievance, and not even deny it while watching it on tape, in fact, agreeing with him. I mean, I'll just share with you, this is my first memory of Ciryl, but there's a reason that I remember him, and then he goes in there with more former champions, current greats. He starts beating them all. Ciryl runs his record up to 15-0, and then a very interesting stat comes out. Very interesting stat starts circling the airwaves to the fact that it finally got grabbed and used by ESPN, which was Ciryl Gane has never been taken down. Ciryl Gane has not been on the canvas for 1 second. And that was a very interesting take. Because that reminds some of us from the old school of when Jeff Blatnick, rest his soul, told the world, as it related to Vitor Belfort, that he had no known weaknesses. It was very similar to find out Ciryl hasn't spent 1 second on the canvas. That's how they worded it, by the way. They didn't say he's never been taken down, he's never had to use his jiu-jitsu, he's never had to use the belt, he's never had to scramble, he's never had to get up, nobody can take him off his feet. They let you draw those conclusions on your own by saying that he has not spent 1 second on the canvas. Then they go and book him for a world title fight, and they don't book him with a wrestler. They book him with Derek Lewis, somebody that likes to stand up and trade. Now, that's going to be very interesting, right? You've got technique, got all-around technique, got a big, beautiful pedigree and resume from Ciryl. And you got straight up power by Derek Lewis. So we're drawn into this. I mean, it was very split. Who's going to go where? They ended up doing it in Houston, hometown of Derek Lewis. And that did sway a lot of people thinking that piece of favoritism or of advantage is going to help Derek. They went out there. They had a stand-up fight. Ciryl Gane left with the championship of the world. Now, I want to go back on that, and I want to just gloss forward to now. Okay, so let me not be quite so wordy. Ciryl suffers his first loss. Do you want to know what happened to him next? And if you told me who his opponent was, you failed the course. Ciryl Gane loses his first fight. Do you know what happened to him next? If you tell me the opponent, you've been sleeping in class. Ciryl Gane lost his first fight. He returned to a main event. He took on Tai Tuivasa, as a matter of fact. So now he's 1-1 in his last two. Do you know where he went? To a main event opposite Jon Jones. He loses that fight. So now he's 1-2 out of his last three. Do you know where he went next? To a main event. It's this Saturday. And that's all that matters. And that's the only part of the story that actually matters. Are you going to fall? Yes. Are you going to fall down? Are you going to fall backwards? Well, that's your choice. Somebody knocks you over. Why do you always fall backwards? You don't have to. Next time you lose your balance, fall forward. Try it sometime. There's nothing that makes you go backwards. Try it sometime. Next time you fall, I've lost my balance. Go forward. Ciryl fell forward. He lost his last fight. In the very first round, he was stopped. I mean, just by example, like these are things that most fighters would allow to pull them down. Ciryl's a main event. I can't remember, aside from the example of the first time I saw him fighting Junior Dos Santos, I can't remember Ciryl not being the main event. And I know not all of his fights were, but I can't remember it. Top of my head, I only see him as a main event fighter. I only see him as getting ready for 5 rounds. It's an interesting spot. Now he's fighting in Paris, which they say is his home country. They're bringing in number 7 guy. I mean, this is a hard draw. But they give him a hard draw every single time. He seems to find a way. He seems to adapt very well. And where does Ciryl go with a victory? I think you'd have a hard time answering it. You'd have some guesses. But where does Ciryl go with a loss? I think you'd have a hard time answering it. You'd have some guesses. And guys like that are very rare. Guys where if you were to close your eyes and then picture a loss and it not being a devastating thing, they're very rare. It's an interesting concept. Ciryl Gane is in the main event. He's in a main event and he's favored to win. People will tell you that if you lost your last fight, you have to fight somebody else who lost their last fight. They'll tell you that. They actually believe it. You'll have managers say, well, it doesn't make sense. You won and he lost. Those are your rules. Those aren't the actual rules. Ciryl Gane not only lost his last fight, he's lost 2 of his last 3 fights. Oh, by the way, his last 4 were for world championships. Do you see where things are a little bit different? Do you see where he belongs in a main event? There's times in life you got to follow the rules. And there's times in life you got to realize somebody made up those rules and that person's got no power over you.